Hi, my name is Pat from Wicklow Willow and you're very welcome to a cold and frosty Glendalough. I'm standing in here in the Cathedral in Glendalough and I'm going to discuss St. Brigid with you all today. Normally I'd like to be down in Kildare in front of St. Brigid's Cathedral to discuss St. Brigid, but owing to the 5k restrictions, Glendalough is within my 5k. I'm hoping that this week you and your parents might get out and visit a monastery or a church site and think about what it would have been like for St. Brigid back in the 5th and 6th century. So St. Brigid was named after a Celtic goddess. Her mother was a slave named Brocca, and funnily enough, we live in the townland of Brocca here in Glendalough. Her father was a Leinster chieftain named Dovetock. When her mother fell pregnant, her father sold her to a pagan who employed her as a slave. When she was born, she worked with her mother and she lived with her mother. She loved to help the poor. She would always give things away, no matter what they had or didn't have. She loved to give away what little they had to people who she thought were more in need of it. She once gave away all her mother's butter that was stored up for the year. Her mother was very angry at this, so St. Brigid set to praying, and afterwards all the butter was restored. That apparently was her first miracle. She used to give away her possessions, as I said, but after a while her father wanted his daughter back. So at the age of 10, she went to the King of Leinster. She went to her father, who was a Leinster chieftain, Dovetock. She started to give away lots of Dovetock's possessions too, and he wasn't very pleased about this, so he took her to the King of Leinster to try and sell her to him. And the King of Leinster was studying Brigid, and he watched as she took her father's sword and gave it to a passing poor person. Her father said of her, or the King of Leinster said of her heart, that her merit before God is greater than ours, and he wouldn't buy her. So she stayed with her father, and after a number of years, as she grew up, her father wanted to marry her off to the King of Ulster. Brigid wanted to go into a religious order. She saw God as her calling, and she didn't want to be married off. So she prayed that she might have her good looks taken from her. God granted this wish, and Brigid no longer had her good looks while she studied to be ordained. She was ordained a priest by St. Patrick, and the day she was ordained, her good looks returned. When it was pointed out to St. Patrick that he had accidentally ordained her a priest, he was quite philosophical about it and thought it was meant to be. She was the first woman ever to be ordained a priest, apparently. Now she needed a site for a monastery, and she picked the lovely plains of Kildare. She approached her old friend, the King of Leinster, and she asked him for some land in which to have a monastery. But the king wasn't in the game of giving away land for nothing, so he refused. So Brigid and her followers set to praying for the king, praying that he would be able to see in his heart to give them the land. She prayed his heart would soften, and on a second time she asked him simply for as much land as her cloak could cover. The king was bemused by this, and he agreed to her request, and they met in the plains of Kildare. And Brigid asked her followers to take her cloak, a corner each, and go in 4 opposite directions, north, east, south and west. As they started to walk, the cloak grew and grew and grew. The king looked on in amazement. They grew to cover hundreds and hundreds of acres. The king was good to his word, and he allowed her to keep the land that her cloak had covered. On this ground she built her church, the Church of the Oak, in Kildare town. Now we're going to talk about St. Brigid's cross. Traditionally made on the 1st of February or sometimes the day before, it's usually made of reeds, straw or rushes. They were woven in a crisscross pattern with 4 radials to form a cross. Sometimes they're made with 3 radials. They were traditionally hung on a thatched roof in cottages to ward off fire, and they would be left there, and over years you could have many crosses in the thatch. Nowadays they're made once a year and they're hung over the doorway of a house to ward off fire and keep everybody in the house safe. The story behind the cross is a very great story. It's about Brigid visiting an old pagan chieftain who was ill. His servants came to her looking for help, as he was restless and he couldn't settle. So Brigid went to visit him, and within minutes she soothed and calmed him. She chatted away to him and he listened intently. As she was chatting, she bent to the floor, which was covered in rushes. They covered in rushes to keep the floor clean and dry. So Brigid picked up some of these rushes and started to make a very simple and crude cross, bending them one over the other, round in a circle, one over another. The pagan chieftain watched on as Brigid made these crosses, or made the cross, I should say. He asked her about the cross and what it meant, and she explained to him the history behind the cross and what it meant to Christianity. He was enthralled. He asked to be converted to Christianity, and Brigid baptized him just before he passed away. Brigid's saint day, as I mentioned, is February 1st, and this is because she passed away on the 1st of February herself in 525. That's almost 1500 years ago, 15 centuries. In 4 years' time, we'll have to have a big celebration of Saint Brigid. She was buried at the time at her church in Kildare, where she rested for 300 years and more. In the 9th century, the Viking attack started in Ireland, and Brigid's remains were removed. They were interred beside St. Patrick and St. Columba. They were moved again shortly afterwards to the Down Cathedral, where they still rest in Downpatrick. The cross of St. Brigid is known all over the world, and it's always associated with Ireland. We had it as our cross in RTE. Join us in these other videos as we show you how to make your own St. Brigid's cross. The next video will show you how to harvest reeds, and I hope you can join us. Thank you. Goodbye.